GoLongTD.com, humanizing pro football journalism.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Go Long podcast. Thank you so much for listening, whether you listen right here at Go Long, Apple, Spotify, YouTube, everywhere. We greatly appreciate your support, and we really appreciate everybody out there who subscribes to the newsletter and checked out our one-on-one conversation with Buffalo Bills GM Brandon Beane. That is live right now. We get into everything from the Stephon Diggs trade to maximizing Josh Allen, letting Josh be Josh, as we've talked about often at Go Long, to Keon Coleman, the search for the right chemistry when it comes to the roster, adopting that Bill Polian-like playoff index and wanting your best players to be at their best in the playoffs. That influenced roster decisions as well. It's all at GoLongTD.com. Sat down with Brandon Beane for an hour. Incredibly open, incredibly candid when it comes to the GM of a football team. You rarely hear the head of an operation speak like this. So thank you to everybody who has joined, who has subscribed. Greatly appreciate that. And when it comes to the podcast, thanks to our good friends at Fatty Beer. They fuel us, and it is always a good time to find a Fatty near you in Western New York and get any beer you could possibly desire. They bring in the best of the best from around the country. Kenmore, Tonawanda, Downtown, Orchard Park, Hamburg. They're all over the place. Thank you so much for listening. I know you're going to love this episode. Jay Skurski of the Buffalo News, my buddy Jay. We get into everything Buffalo Bills, Beane's vision, Sean McDermott's coaching, Josh Allen, post Diggs receiving core. I think you're really going to enjoy Jay's return to the podcast. Thank you so much. Be sure to rate, review, share, all that good stuff. We are powered by you first and foremost. What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Go Long podcast. Recurring guest, Jay Skurski, is here again. Back for more. The people have spoken, Jay. They need you in their lives. They like to hear us blab and banter and debate and agree. I'm not sure
download numbers
they're getting it
through the roof. Absolutely. Just, off the charts download numbers, I'm sure. No. Yeah. Hey, I'm
it
happy
did do
to be
well.
back.
It did very well, actually. Yes.
That's exciting. That's great to hear. I'm happy to hear that. It means maybe people aren't sick of hearing me talk or listening to me talk about the Bills or write about the Bills. So that's great. No, and I'm always happy to. Recurring guest sounds great. I'm happy to do it anytime you call. You know that.
I appreciate it, man, and the listeners, the readers appreciate it. It was great to be there at One Bills Drive with you. It's been a bit for myself in that building, so loved being in there, seeing you, Fairburn, the whole gang. A lot happening with this team. I think when we chatted last, it was out of the draft. So the Bills are kind of in this haze of all these new players, 38 new players on the 90-man roster, which is a lot for a team that's really been banging on that Super Bowl door for 4 or 5 years now. So I think that's the theme of this show. What are the Buffalo Bills? Mm-hmm. How excited should people be? I sat down with Brandon Beane this week. You were talking to players this week and have your 53-man projection up. So I don't start there, Jay. Like, out of minicamp, you can only take so much. They're in shorts. And, Kyer Elam makes a play here, makes a play there. Chase Claypool, may pluck a ball over somebody's helmet. Now, there's some substance to talk about, but I think it's more about getting a feel for the bigger picture when we're out there, right? You don't want to get too crazy one way or the other with the actual play-by-play.
No, definitely not. I think if you were to do that, you might come away with some concerns about the wide receiver situation, right? I thought there were a lot of drops. I thought there was some miscommunication. I think that's all to be expected. You got one receiver, Khalil Shakir, who caught a pass last year from Josh Allen. So there's a learning curve there, right? There is some needed chemistry forming and building that has to take place with Allen and his wide receivers. And we were talking just before we started here, they actually held the last practice of minicamp. That's unusual. Usually that's a go bowling or go play golf or just go home and get started on your summer. Sean McDermott decided not to do that, and I can see why. I think it's a bit of a no-win situation for him. He's going to get the guys didn't want to be there, probably the players, the coaches, but they handled it well. They put in a day of practice. And for a team that has 38 new players, as you mentioned, they're going to need all of those practice reps that they can get. This is a team in transition, as Brandon Beane has said to us, said to you, and maybe not exactly those words, but I know you had a long interview with him, and he has referred to that. And it doesn't have to be a bad thing. It certainly does not. But for it to be a good thing, it's going to take a lot of work, a lot of practice. There is a lot of coming together that many new faces and new players has to accomplish. And the only way that can be done is on the field. And you and I both know, Tyler, the practice rules are a lot different even than when we started covering this league. And we're on the younger end of the guys covering this league. We're getting older now, but you look at some of our older colleagues, Vic and Mark, and the way that the league was when they covered it at the start is much different. You don't have those opportunities to practice. There's no pads, as you mentioned, right? It's shorts and t-shirts and helmets. So while you're right, you can't draw too many firm and hard conclusions based on what we've seen. Anytime that they can get together, I think is a good thing for this team. And to that end, the attendance was really strong at OTAs, at minicamp. Everyone was there, save for Christian Benford, who had an excused absence. So there was no drama. We'll go back to last year's minicamp and the firestorm of a certain wide receiver who missed the first day. There was none of that. This was a team that was putting in the work, and that'll need to continue at training camp.
Right. Probably not a coincidence that Sean McDermott referenced the unselfishness of the team this time of year. Do you think that was pointed at Stephon Diggs when he said that, or just a coincidence?
It's a great question. I think Sean McDermott is so measured in what he says to the media and thinks about his message, his delivery of that message, his knowing that people are going to consume that, whether it be fans or players, right? Current and former players. All of that is going to get out there. So I tend to believe that wasn't a coincidence, that it wasn't on accident, because I think it was a theme. I think, and it wasn't just Sean McDermott that sort of referenced it. I think there was a lot of references, whether you heard from wide receivers, quarterbacks, there was a lot of, hey, this is, we're going to do whatever it takes to win, and it's about the team. It's not about it's about we, that kind of thing. And listen, it's going to have to be that, right? The 160 targets walked out the door with Stephon Diggs, and they don't have a player on this roster that's going to replace that in terms of, hey, he's the no doubt about it number one wide receiver. They just don't have it. And so, if they spread those targets out, that's just the way it's going to have to be. Again, doesn't have to be a bad thing, but for it to be a good thing, guys are going to have to step up. Guys are going to have to contribute and deliver, maybe at a level that they haven't before in their careers. We'll see, though. I mean, it's a gamble, I think, on Brandon Beane's part to say that, we can move on from Stephon Diggs. Now is the time. We'll see if he's right.
I was pleasantly surprised. I guess not surprised, because Brandon Beane is known as being candid compared to other GMs around the NFL, right? They'll tee up a lot of cliches, a lot of word salads, filibuster, get through an hour with as many words as they possibly can that say absolutely nothing. But when it comes to Stephon Diggs, in so many words, Brandon Beane did make it clear it was more than just the finances, right? It's more than just getting out of that 4-year, $96 million extension, more than just eating the $31 million that they're going to eat this year, take the medicine, move on. There is some culture stuff there. And I think he's very measured with his words, Jay, and you've been around him too. I mean, you were at the press conference right after the trade. Like, there's a lot of good to Stephon Diggs, like Brandon said. I mean, he came in 2020, and the timing was spot on. They needed Stephon Diggs in that moment. This was a team that didn't really know how to believe, right? I know they ended the playoff drought, but the losing and the feeling of, are we good enough? Do we deserve to win? Do we deserve to pull this game out in the fourth quarter? it was still kind of in limbo, I feel like, for the Bills at that time. They were up and coming. Stephon Diggs comes in. He's a thunderbolt, right? It's the intensity level goes from about a 3.5 to a 10 overnight. And he's going to be a little nuts. He's going to be in your face. Isaiah McKenzie's going to have to be his babysitter. There's a lot that comes with Stephon Diggs, but Brandon Beane kept using that word timing. The timing was right then. And whatever anybody thinks about Stephon Diggs in 2024, and I can definitely see both points of view. I get him still being a hell of a player. Halfway through the season, he's on his way to a career year, and the offense changes and things go south statistically. But I get the Buffalo Bills wanting to just move on from the Stephon Diggs business, just like they wanted to move on from a lot of these players and move on from a lot of these losses. Brandon Beane, he said this, look, with all of these new players and this influx of rookies, but not just rookies, the Marquez Valdes-Scantlings of the world, the Chase Claypools, they weren't around for 13 seconds. They weren't around for that beatdown put on them by the Cincinnati Bengals. They weren't there for the 44-yard wide right and losing to the Chiefs at home. Quote, you're not walking out there with 53 guys with the same scars. I think psychologically, who knows how you measure that? But did you think there is something to that of just having a lot of new players, a lot of new starters, a lot of new core leaders who weren't really around for this heartbreak where the Bills would get in that moment and it's, here we go again. Damn it, here we go again. Late in the fourth quarter, something is going to go wrong. I mean, but players on those teams said that feeling is real, and it's hard to pinpoint it, but something did go wrong constantly. You go back to the Hail Murray and the Philly Neal and all the nicknames we bestowed upon these meltdowns, and maybe Sean McDermott is to blame for a lot of these losses. People know what I've written on that.
Yeah.
When it comes to the players themselves, there is a benefit to just having a lot of fresh blood in there, isn't there?
Well, let's stop there and ask ourselves a really important question. What had that group really won? What did they win? They've won AFC East. That's great. When Tom Brady was in New England, they weren't doing that. There was 20-year gap where they had, not won the AFC East. And for most of those 20, they weren't even really competitive in the division. So I don't want to belittle that accomplishment because it is an accomplishment, but they've made one conference championship game with this group. So I feel like this team has almost looked at as being, for lack of a better way to phrase it, a little bit better than what it's been. I mean, they've been a playoff team, yes, but they have not made considerably deep playoff runs. They made it to one conference title game. They have never had the number one seed, right? They haven't gotten that bye, which I think could be very important going into the postseason. The best they did in that regard was number 2 last year, and that took a heck of a lot of maneuvering at the end of the year, a winning streak, a collapse by the Dolphins to get there. So when we talk about replacing that core, right, and they've lost so much of it, right, Morse and the captains, Poyer, Hyde, Diggs, right, 6 of 8 team captains. That's a lot, and I get that. And you're losing a lot of leadership. You're losing a lot of guys that know the system. You're also losing a lot of guys who haven't been able to seal the deal in Buffalo. And getting younger, getting cheaper, they had to. They didn't have a choice. The salary cap demanded it. The salary cap is real, right? People can sit there and say that it's not all they want. And yes, I know there's ways to massage it and make moves and maneuver around it. But eventually it catches up with you, and eventually you have to hit a reset button. And they did that with Diggs. They did that with Morse, who still played at a high level last year. They decided not to re-sign Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde. So, I guess release Poyer, before, he had 1 year left on his deal. So they swallowed their medicine, right? They took those shots, those painful shots in a lot of ways. But again, I go back to that group. As good as they have been, and as much good as they have done for the Bills, they had taken them to one conference championship game. What are we talking about here, right? With Josh Allen, the guy that is top 3 quarterback in the NFL, maybe top 2, right? You're talking about Patrick Mahomes and then take your pick at who's number 2, right? Lots of people around the league would say it's Josh Allen. I would make the case that maybe this group underachieved in a lot of different ways, right? And how much of that falls on the head coach? Certainly some of it. You have written about that. I think that I don't disagree with a lot of the points you've made in that regard, but ultimately it's the players on the field, right? At the end of the day, those are the guys that have to go out there and make those plays. And, you know, the game last year against the Chiefs in the divisional round, they're not making the plays. Stephon Diggs is not making the play down the field. Marquez Valdez-Scantling is making the catch or a couple of big catches for the Chiefs. Stephon Diggs is not making those plays. Gabe Davis is not making the play that Josh Allen throws with a bum elbow 75 yards down the field against the Jets, and it goes right through Gabe Davis's hands. He didn't make the play, right?
Cincinnati, 2 years ago in the playoffs, Gabe Davis, right? That was like a 3rd and 2.
Right.
The last play of the third quarter. Yeah.
Yeah. You've got these examples of these guys who have done so many good things, and they're going to be remembered as great Bills, and they should. But at some point, if you're Brandon Beane, you say, well, number one, we have to try something new because the salary cap demands it. But number two, is it that bad of an idea to try something new? Because what we have tried the last 4 years, at least when we've gotten to the postseason, has not worked.
Yeah. Great points all around. And Brandon Beane, I want to say 4 different times in our conversation, referenced the fact that your best players need to be at their best in the playoffs. He totally agreed with Bill Polian's line of thinking with those Indianapolis Colts teams. You know, they're similar to the Bills. They're getting to the playoffs. They've got to get past Tom Brady and the Patriots. They've got their own Goliath to slay here, and they keep falling short again and again and again and again. And Bill Polian started to really weigh playoff performance a hell of a lot more than the regular season. You grade that on a curve, and you're going to make some tougher decisions. Mike Vanderjagt, the most accurate kicker in NFL history, he's out the door after he misses that kick against the Steelers. They're taking chances in the draft. They're taking a DB, Kelvin Hayden, who played 1 year at cornerback at Illinois as a wide receiver. He has a pick 6 in the Super Bowl that next year. And Beane multiple times said, and he's right. The margin for error is minuscule. When you look at how close the Bills have been to the Chiefs in these games, quote, if you make a field goal, what happens there? The ball needs to bounce your way. Your best players have to play well. You've got to stay healthy. There's so many things. This team, I know the character of it. It's not going to give up. And he goes on, please, everybody, thank you so much for subscribing, for reading. The full Q&A is at golongtd.com. But I think that's a reference to Diggs and other players. But we all saw Allen's perfect throw. Allen, the quarterback that Brandon Beane and his staff diagnosed, moved up the draft, selected over Josh Rosen to the dismay of the majority of the fan base, right?
Yeah.
He's going to hang his hat on Josh Allen, as he should, makes an all-time throw against the Kansas City Chiefs. How many yards through the air was that, Jay? I can't remember.
It was 60 plus.
60 plus.
Yeah.
And he can't make that play. You've got to make, I think that is a factor in this equation of trading Stephon Diggs, that, you know, the Houston Texans, they reached out, as he said, much earlier in the offseason, and they kind of sat on it. And maybe they think about it, they start weighing the pros and cons, and that's a play that kind of tilts you one direction versus the other.
It's an entirely fair criticism in my mind. You talked about the best players being at their best, playing their best in the postseason. Outside of Josh Allen, who can you say in the Bills' last 2 elimination losses, to Cincinnati and to Kansas City, who can you say has been at their best? You can't say it about Diggs. You certainly can't say it about Ed Oliver, who's been invisible in both of those games. The entire defensive line has had their lunch eaten against the Bengals and against the Chiefs. And I think that's a big reason that they weren't upset at all about Eric Washington moving on as the defensive line coach, the assistant head coach who didn't have the defensive coordinator title. But I don't think it's a surprise at all that Eric Washington isn't here. That defensive line has completely no-showed in the last 2 playoff games. And when you consider the resources that they have sunk into that line over and over again, they just can't seem to get it right. you've got to affect the game. You've got to affect Joe Burrow. You've got to affect Patrick Mahomes. Patrick Mahomes has one loss in the Super Bowl, and it's because the Tampa Bay Buccaneers dominated the line of scrimmage in that game. Now, Kansas City was dealing with some injuries on the offensive line, but that was the key to that game, right? And so that's the recipe for beating Patrick Mahomes in the playoffs. You've got to harass him. You've got to affect him. The Bills have not done that in the postseason. They certainly in this last loss, and they didn't do it against Burrow the year before that either. So, you talk about your best players being your best players. Diggs wasn't it. Oliver wasn't it. Oliver's still here. They paid him. He had a really good regular season. I thought he took a big step forward. But that's the challenge for him now. That's the challenge for a lot of these guys now. If they get back there, right? I mean, who knows, right? Are we talking about a playoff team here? I mean, I think most projections for this team are maybe, around that 10-win, 11-win mark. If you're overly optimistic, you're at 12. It took 11 to get in last year. I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about that, but eventually they're going to be back there. And I believe they'll be a playoff team, but I need to see it. I need to see other guys other than Josh Allen being at their best in the postseason.
I think the urgency is still there with Brandon Beane too, where you're 41 plus mil in the red, even with the higher salary cap, and you've got to make a lot of hard decisions. You let go of a lot of mainstays that we've referenced here: Mitch Morse, Tre'Davious White, Jordan Poyer, Gabe Davis walks, even a Tyrell Dodson. Then you trade Stephon Diggs. You do all this. You financially get your head above water to breathe. I don't think that, they're using the word transition, and it's a theme, and it may be strategic, and it may be put out there to kind of let fans know, hang with us in 2025, 2026. Oh, by the way, that new stadium will be ready to go in 2026. Like, that's a smart thing for any GM to do if you're Brandon Beane. But in the same breath, though, like several times over, he referenced the fact that we've got to win now. We can't waste these opportunities. We've got Josh Allen in his prime, and the team needs to flow through him. And I think that they have kind of found this balance of like taking in Josh Allen's input, but not anointing him the assistant general manager like the New York Jets have done with Aaron Rodgers, who, don't get me going on Aaron Rodgers. The word narcissist just really doesn't do him justice at this point. He's not in the headlines, so he needs to be in the headlines, and we're all talking about him. The event, who the hell knows what event he is at? He'll never change. He'll only get worse, and the Jets deserve all of this, honestly. I mean, the Jets should not scare the Bills at this point. They will be an abomination, and they deserve every ounce of turmoil and drama that comes their way. But, okay, let me get my brain back on track. I feel like
there.
Yeah, it's like I'm getting that vortex, right? But I think that Brandon Beane gets it. Like, he wants Josh Allen to be himself. Last offseason, we heard Sean McDermott. It started in March, right? In the NFL Network interview on wanting the quarterback to be cautious, play more safely, slide more, step out of bounds. It felt like a very orchestrated talking point where, I mean, Brandon Beane, he doesn't want Josh Allen being reckless, but he made it clear that this quarterback has a linebacker's mentality, and he's got to play that way, right? Mm-hmm. That's how you get that third down conversion against the Miami Dolphins, where there's 3 white jerseys. He's got to blast through a long ways from the first down marker, and he gets there. It's like Dave Chappelle. You're not going to tell a comedian, you can't make this joke, you can't make that joke. Here's red tape, here's caution tape. Don't just let him go. I feel like Brandon Beane gets it. So that's what should encourage Bills fans is he does know that he doesn't have all the time in the world to win a Super Bowl here, right? It is a transition. They are taking their medicine, but I still think that they are, as they should, approaching this season as win now. I know the Lombardi Trophy banner is down in the field house, so that's another point of messaging. But I feel like it still is going to be a very Super Bowl or bust kind of feel to this team, as it should be if Josh Allen is your quarterback.
Yeah, I mean, be as good as you can for as long as you can, right? I think that should be the goal for every team, for every franchise. And I'll be the first to admit I was wrong about the Allen and the running, and it's been a topic that just covered so many different ways. You know, I get asked about it, I feel like in the season almost weekly in the mailbag that I do. Is he running too much? Is he not running enough? And for a while there, I was on the side that, you know, he was being a little bit reckless with the way the number of hits that he was subjecting himself to. And I'll be the first to tell you, I was wrong. You can't, you go back to that Jets season opener and he's got 10, 20 yards of running room in front of him. And instead he's throwing it down the field into double or triple coverage and getting intercepted. And I think it was in his head. I honestly do. I think they had gotten to him about the running. And it backfired. It absolutely backfired because it's who he is. And he's not gotten hurt outside of the pocket in his career. That's where his injuries have occurred. That's where most quarterback injuries occur. He's built different. He's bigger. He's tougher, you know, and that's not to say that he's never going to get hurt and he's never going to get hurt running. It very well could happen. I'm here to tell you, though, it's a occupational hazard. It comes with the territory. You've got to live with it. You've got to trust that the guy's been in the league long enough that he's going to know how to protect himself. He's going to know when to protect himself. When's the right time to say, this is an opportunity for me to step out of bounds. I don't have to take that hit versus, as you said, it's third down and I got to go get it. And I'm going to do whatever it takes, no matter who's in front of me, to do it. You've got to trust at this point in his career that Allen can make that decision, but he has to play free. He has to play not worrying about, are the coaches going to get mad at me because I'm running here? And I, like I said, I can't say it enough. I was wrong about that because I definitely thought he was running too much, but then you see the alternative and that's not it either. Let Josh Allen be Josh Allen. You've written that. You've said it many, many times, you know, in your stories. I've seen you tweet it a lot and I agree with it. He's got to be who he is. And as long as he is, he's going to give you a chance to win every week. And so, you know, you said, is it, you know, Super Bowl or bust? I don't know that I'm going to say that. I would certainly say that I don't think nationally they're going to have that label on them. I don't even know if the fan base would necessarily expect that, but I also don't know that that's a bad thing. I don't know that they need that pressure. I'm very interested to see how the Houston Texans handle being everybody's darlings of the offseason and what that looks like for them, because the Bills have been in that role. And it didn't suit them well. It rarely does. You know, you go back and look at, you know, the Super Bowl favorites based on Vegas betting odds, how often they win it. It doesn't happen every year, right? And it's a challenge when you're in that role. And I think if people are, for lack of a better term, sleeping on this team a little bit going into this year, that doesn't have to be a bad thing at all for them.
Yeah, I guess when I say Super Bowl or bust, I'm thinking back to Brett Favre in the mid-90s. And I just keep coming back to Brett Favre when it comes to Josh Allen. And more so, every year you have a quarterback in his prime playing this way. That's the expectation. That should be the expectation. You don't know how many opportunities you're going to get. And I think Brandon Beane gets it in terms of we've got Josh Allen. Let him create his art on the field and get the hell out of the way. Yeah. Right? And did Sean McDermott turn that corner? Maybe, right? Coaches can change. Coaches can evolve. And credit where credit's due. Fourth and shorts, you saw a lot of Josh Allen running. You saw a lot of McDermott decisions to go for it. Even we're kind of taking it more big picture here now, Jay, but even the fake punt to Damar Hamlin, I can't criticize it too much here because that's kind of the cojones that this coach and this team have been missing in those playoff moments. I just feel like you can't snap your fingers and get that overnight. You can't get that in a month, right? They were trying to speak that belief. He was trying to speak that belief into existence through that winning streak, which was good, but it's really got to kind of be interwoven into the fabric of your team, right? Maybe that's why this time of year is kind of important. In May, June, July, August, September, as this offseason grinds into the early part of the regular season, you've got to show your players you believe with your action. And then when you get to the playoffs, they're not thinking twice, right? When you make a call like that, they're not second guessing themselves in the moment. Is this going to work? Is this not going to work? What are we doing? Right? When Dan Campbell, he's caught criticism himself, but like, you know where Dan Campbell stands.
Yeah.
Right? He's always going to go for it. And he did that in a Vikings game early in the season. Or he didn't do that, I should say. They opted for like a 54-yard field goal. It didn't work. And very publicly at that press conference after, I'll never forget, he's just like, man, he was almost in tears. He's like, I will never do that again. I will believe in my guys. And that point forward in the 2022 season, I believe, into 2023, when they win the division and they get to the NFC Championship game, you knew where the head coach stood. I don't know if Sean McDermott's going to become Dan Campbell, but you can, through your actions, show your players you believe in them. And that would be a major step for this head coach, I feel like. And you've got Josh Allen as your quarterback, right? It's right. One thing to be going for it on fourth down and taking all these chances if Kelly Holcomb or Jabron Hamden is your quarterback.
Yeah.
It's Josh Allen. You can take these chances. So, go for broke right now. Why not?
Well, I think McDermott has absolutely evolved in his, study of analytics, his decision making on fourth down. I think he has shown that he has been more aggressive in those situations. I know that there are a lot of, sort of those analytic type websites that track those types of things that you see all over social media during the season. And I from what I remember last year, he graded out pretty well in those sort of go for it type situations, right? He has definitely shown, I think, an improvement in those situations. I'd take it a step further. You could say against the Chiefs, if you're going to go for it, leave Allen on the field. Don't put it into the hands of DeMar Hamlin, right? I mean, you really want to be aggressive. Leave your best player on the field. Give him the ball. So is there room for him to continue to grow? Always, right? I don't know that you're ever going to get to, as you said, Dan Campbell territory. Now, I don't know that he has to either, though, right? I think you can find that balance. You can find the fine line. Your point about trusting the players, though, ultimately is what matters here, right? You've got, like, they have to believe in the plan. They have to believe in what the coaching staff is sending into them, right? And so I think that when we've talked so much about the player turnover, we probably haven't made enough of the coordinator turnover here in Buffalo too, right? This is now Joe Brady's offense, right? And it's going to look different than Brian Daboll's did, than Ken Dorsey's did, right? They're each going to put their own sort of wrinkles on it. Joe Brady, to his credit, wisely said this is Josh Allen's offense. Perfect. That's what you want to hear, right? But Brady's going to have input. Of course he's going to have input. He's the guy calling in the plays. He's going to be the guy working with Allen to say, this is what we like. This is what we don't like. And I think we're going to get an opportunity now to really see what that looks like because, when he took over last year with the amount of time that they had left, you're not blowing things up. You're not changing it drastically. You're tweaking it at best, but you don't have the time that you do in the off season. And I got to tell you, I think, and you've had it. I'd be interested to hear what you think because you haven't observed him nearly as much as I have. But like seeing Bobby Babich running the defense and the energy that he has, and just the way that the players respond to him, he's a really impressive guy. And so I think it'll be really fun to watch how that defense comes together with Babich. How does he put his fingerprints on it? Of course, it's Sean McDermott's defense. It's always going to be that as a defensive-minded head coach. But the Bills didn't want Bobby Babich to leave the building, right? He had opportunities. He had job interviews with other teams, including Miami, including the Giants, maybe the Packers. So there was sufficient interest in Bobby Babich around the NFL, and that tells you a lot about a 40-year-old, right, who has never been a defensive coordinator. But if this goes right for him, if this goes well, to me, that's a future head coach in waiting. And he's a really, he's selfishly for the media, he's going to be great to talk to because he's awesome. He gives you insight. He thinks about the questions. You can tell that he genuinely cares about his players. This track record, Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde are making all-pro teams while he's the safeties coach. Matt Milano and Terrell Bernard are having amazing years. He's the linebackers coach. Tremaine Edmonds is getting a $72 million contract 1 year after playing for Babich for a year. I think there's a ton to like about Babich. And I also think, spinning it back to McDermott, and maybe this is a point you and I have made together. I've done a couple of, these types of podcasts or interviews where I've mentioned it. I don't think 7 years ago, Sean McDermott is in a position where he's trusting Joe Brady or Bobby Babich to be his coordinators. I think it shows growth on his.
Dennison had it under control, Jay.
Yeah, right. Rick Dennison, and then, Leslie Frazier. And listen, Leslie Frazier is an amazing guy. Great, great guy. But he's sort of a safe defensive coordinator hire. He is not Bobby Babich, who at that point was 34 or 35 years old and is full of piss and vinegar, right? That's not Leslie Frazier. They are opposite ends of the spectrum. And so I think it shows McDermott, trusting these younger guys. I'll be really interested to see what kind of stamp Babich can leave on this defense.
Right. Totally. I think an evolved Sean McDermott, and it's going to be through action, right? Not words, not a press conference. It's the granular things, like they going for it on the fourth down. And if James Cook fumbles the ball against Denver, you don't yank him immediately like this is high school basketball. Maybe I had a little PTSD to being a point guard, right, at Ellicable Central my sophomore year, and one too many turnovers that first game against Franklinville, Jay. I want to go there, okay? Yeah. It's a rough night. It's a rough night. But it was kind of like that at times with players. Like, you screw up, getting the hell out of here. Mm-hmm. So it's the small things like that, the micro, but it's also the macro of hiring young, energetic coordinators and then genuinely empowering them, right? Mm-hmm. Like really letting Joe Brady do his thing as the offensive coach. And remember the times where McDermott and Brian Daboll, they clashed. Famously, the Win game, the Patriots game. It was very public after that game in the press conferences on Sean McDermott wanting his offensive coordinator to run the ball. And it gets to halftime of the Tampa Bay game. The Bills are getting creamed, and Daboll and the offense basically say, screw that. We're doing our thing. We're going to let Josh be Josh. And the season turns. They catch fire. Like, you hire coordinators for a reason, especially if you're a defensive coach. And, that's where your intellect and that's where your knowledge is. I feel like you got to let Joe Brady do his thing, and maybe that's what he's going to do. We'll see, right? Action. Yeah. Again, same thing with Bobby Babich on the defensive side, because that would allow Sean to take a CEO-like approach to the operation, and he doesn't have to get caught up into the play-to-play, second-to-second decision-making where if his brain's divided in a million different directions, that's where maybe these late-game breakdowns happen as well.
I would just say real quick, like, you're right, because it could go one of two ways. You could look at this if you have a genuinely or like a general pessimistic outlook on Sean McDermott, you could say, yeah, he's hiring these young guys because he wants to control them, and he knows that they're not going to challenge him, and he's going to be able to do it. They're going to do it whatever Sean McDermott wants in his way. That would be the negative sort of glass half full look at hiring young coordinators. The spin it forward, the positive, the optimistic, the glass half, I said glass half full, glass half empty approach would be that negative way. The glass half full approach would be, no, he's going to empower them. He's going to let them be themselves because he believes in them as coaches. He wants to see them grow. He wants to see them become head coaches down the line. And the way that they're going to do that is to succeed, but he's going to be hands off enough to give them that room to grow into the job. And I think that's a big question for McDermott. He has to do that. He has to do that because it doesn't do any good to just hire these young guys if you're just going to boss them around and make them do what you want to do. And so you have to hope that isn't McDermott. I've seen enough growth in him. Listen, I will be the first to admit I've got a soft spot for Sean. I think that he's done a good job. I think that, I do think that his heart is in the right place most times, but I think all sorts of criticism that has been, out there about him, a lot of it is valid and a lot of it is fair. he has to learn. He has to learn and grow from that. And he has said the right things many times about being open to doing that and trying to do that. Well, one really good way to do that would be to trust these guys, right? It's one thing to hire them. The second part of it is you got to trust them. And so let's see how that develops.
Right. A lot of those coaches that worked under Sean McDermott did not have many good things to say. Like, let's just be honest. They did not. They described life at One Bills Drive as hell in so many words, in so many ways. But a lot of those coaches, they're gone, right? Mm-hmm. This is a new staff, new assistants, new coordinators. Their day-to-day life can be completely different if the head coach is genuinely evolving, right? And that could be the case. It very well could be. And I think that again aligns with what Brandon Beane has done with the roster, where you bring in 38 new faces. We'll see how many make the team, but there will be a lot of new players on this year's team. And a lot of guys that just joined 1 year ago. You don't know what you don't know. They're hearing this head coach for the first time. They're learning this offense, this defense for the first time. Maybe that does align with a new Sean McDermott, right? Who is going to instill you with real belief and is going to empower his coaches. Like, this thing, it can turn around. It can turn around. But again, it's June.
Yeah.
You can go to all 32 teams and have that glass full approach. Like, we have to see it on game day. And it might take time with a younger team now. It might take until week 11, week 12, where they really do kind of figure this thing out and get cooking.
Well, the things, the negative things that the coaches who are no longer here had to say about Sean McDermott, you could look at that and you could say, well, they had an axe to grind, and maybe they did, but it was their truth, right? And so Sean McDermott is aware of what their truth is. He has heard, he has read, he knows what has been said about him by other people. And I'm sure that he can't be pleased with that, hearing that can't make you feel good. Right. And so Sean McDermott has talked all the time about how you never stop learning and this growth mindset, right? You hear that all the time. Well, that certainly doesn't just apply to players. It applies to himself. It applies to everyone in the organization, right? And so whether he agrees with everything that was said about him, disagrees with all of it, or some of it, probably he lands somewhere in the middle. And so if that's the case, then you would hope that he's evolving, right? And he's empowering that new staff that he has underneath him, and that he's learned from maybe previous mistakes that he's made with assistant coaches, or not even mistakes if he doesn't consider them mistakes, but maybe just his approach to it, right? Maybe he alters that in some way. He tweaks that in some way so that it's different. And I think that's the challenge for him. He needs to reinvent himself the same way that this roster gets reinvented by Brandon Beane with the new players, the same way that Josh Allen reinvents himself as a player every offseason in terms of what he works on. This offseason, it's tweaking his mechanics. We talked a lot about that the other day with him. So every offseason, there's a challenge for a player. It's take your weakness and make it a strength, get better at it. And it's got to be the same thing for the head coach. Take a weakness and make it a strength, improve on it.
So perfectly said, Jay. Right. If he's able to look into the mirror and be honest with himself and correct certain aspects of his coaching, of his leadership, maybe he can, right? I would think that if the wide receivers on this team are chipping in to buy Adam Henry a truck, I highly doubt that Sean would be upset about that, as he was with Chad Hall when that happened with that group, right? He seems genuinely open to evolving, and this is probably a good opportunity. I haven't even really brought this up on the podcast, Jay. I don't know if we've really talked about it much at length, but I sat down with Sean at the Combine, Indianapolis, and we talked hardly at all about the stories I wrote. And it was a private conversation, so I'll keep that between us, but it was a very good conversation. Got to know each other, talked about our kids, talked about high school sports. It was an enjoyable conversation, and it was long overdue. And I think it says a lot about him that he wanted to have this conversation and get to know each other. It says a lot about the Bills to reopen that door. I covered the draft all 3 days there, covered minicamp this week. I'll be there at One Bills Drive throughout this season. It would have been really easy for this team and this coach to say, to hell with you, Tyler, right? After what you wrote, you're not welcome. But to me, that shows that Sean McDermott is evolving in a sense, just from my own experiences and sitting down with him like that. I'm looking forward to seeing where this goes in 2024 and beyond, Jay. I really am.
I think, when I go back to what I said earlier about having a soft spot for Sean, I think part of that is that I've had a lot of those conversations with him over the years where I do genuinely think that he does care about people, his team, of course. I think the way that he handled the situation with Damar Hamlin, which, is something that was almost impossible to imagine, right? For a head coach, the job that he did with the team, in that circumstance and in the events surrounding that, I think was exemplary, right? And so I agree with you. I think the fact that he did, want to sort of get to know you a little bit, and you and I have talked about that conversation that you've had, and I do think it shows a willingness and openness to what that word that we keep going back to, evolving, right? And I think that's all part of it. And so, again, that none of that is to say that any of the criticism at him, in my mind is, some of it's unfair, right? Of course. There's a segment of people that are going to be, that you're always going to maybe say, all right, you're taking it a bridge too far here, right? But I think that Sean I've seen that side of him, I guess is the best way for me to describe it. And so being around him, getting to know him the way that I have, I know desperately that he wants to succeed here in Buffalo. He has been here long enough. This is, we're talking about a coach going into his 8th season, right? With the Bills. That is, the days of Dick Duran, being here for 3 years, and Chan Gailey being here for 3, and Mike Mularkey and Doug Marrone being here for 2 are gone. His kids have grown up here. They're Buffalonians at this point, right? And so I think the longer that you're here and the longer that this front office led by Brandon Beane, Sean McDermott leading the coaching staff is here, they get it. It's impossible for these guys, outsiders, to get it when you first get here. You and I have grown up here, right? You're a little younger than I am, but you probably don't have Super Bowl memories the way that I have Super Bowl memories, just based on your age. Maybe you do. But those are my first football memories, right? So you think of my generation, 42 years old. So a little bit older, a little bit younger. And then you think of my father's generation. He's turning 73 in a couple of weeks. And he's been a lifelong fan. And so this championship starved region that has been the butt of late night jokes and, the idea that the Bills just could never get over the hump and the pain that comes with losing those 4 games. And, this dedicated fan base that just wants it so, so badly. There's no way that these coaches that are here for 2 or 3 years can even begin to understand it. Well, when you're Sean McDermott and you've been here for 8 years and you've lived in this community for 8 years, you come away with that understanding. You get it. And so he knows what it means to be the coach of the Bills and what it would mean to be the guy that gets this team over the hump. And so I think he is doing everything in his power. Will he be the guy that gets them there? I don't know. And if they keep having these failures in the playoffs, at some point you're darn right that you got to look at it and say, is he the right guy for the job? You're going to have that conversation. But I don't think that's for lack of trying, certainly. And I don't think it's for, I don't think it's lost on him, I guess is the best way to put it.
Even the players and the coaches who were most critical of Sean and the series we had to go along, a few of them said exactly that. That he is doing everything in his power to do everything he can in his mind that is right for the Buffalo Bills. Right? That's where this can get a little hazy. And it's just okay, that can be true. And it also can be true is the Sean McDermott, Josh Allen head coach quarterback combination a Super Bowl combination, right? It's like Brady and Belichick had this weird, unique relationship where Belichick is going to be old school high school football coach on Brady and treat him like anybody in that locker room. And Brady is the 6th round pick, just dying to please his head coach, especially early on with those first 3 rings, right? So it becomes institutionalized in a way to do what Belichick wants. And it worked for 2 decades. Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes have a special relationship. Andy Reid gets it. Like, he has this juggernaut talent and he needs to just let him go. Doesn't matter what I think. I mean, there are people that have been on this team that question whether McDermott and Josh Allen have that kind of relationship, right? Everything you said, I agree with. I think he is busting his ass to try to bring a Super Bowl title to Western New York. But is that going to be good enough? We don't know. Right. Yeah. And Terry Pagula, does Terry look at this as, okay, I think he knows he's got stability. He's got 4 straight division titles. He's got a new stadium being built across Abbott Road. He's got a lot of other problems with his hockey team, and he's dealing with those. He's bringing in Lindy Ruff. He doesn't want to be firing anybody. But at what point does a switch go off and he thinks, oh man, Josh Allen is 30, 31, 32, 33. I mean, and you're not going to get this current Josh Allen forever. Right. This best player opposite Patrick Mahomes forever. I don't know if he's ever going to just look at it through that lens versus the stability lens. And that's where 2024 is fascinating. I get it. Transition, take your medicine and eat it. All that stuff is true, but you only get so many of these opportunities. And then those were Brandon Beane's words. Like he gets it. You don't want to waste these opportunities.
Well, and that is when you said earlier, and I pushed back a little bit on this whole like Super Bowl or bust idea. That's it right there. Is that how many years do you have this opportunity? And that's why, again, if you have those playoff failures, at some point you got to have the conversation, as uncomfortable as it might be, but it has to start. We can have it, right? We can have it. Fans can have it. Stephen A. Smith on ESPN can have it. Like everyone.
They're too busy talking about Caitlin Clark for the next 4 or 5 months, right?
But it's got to be Terry Pagula that has it.
Yeah.
He's got to be the guy, and you wonder what's the breaking point for him. He's a man of mystery. It's a hard thing to answer. Nobody can really get inside of that head. And to your point, there's a lot going on with Terry Pagula. He's got a stadium that he's building that he's wondering how much is going to cost. He's got the unfortunate situation, of course, with Kim and the family situation and the tax that must be on the entire family and what that's like to go through is probably unimaginable. It can't be easy. He owns an NHL team that is a disgrace in a lot of different ways, and he's got to sort that out. So Terry Pagula has a lot on his plate. Certainly, though, you're right. He's got to be of the mindset that, like, hey, we've got to make this count. With this quarterback, do we have the right head coach? At some point, he's going to have to answer. He's going to have to ask that question.
Right. And McDermott and Beane have this shared vision. We assume they're joined at the hip. Those are conversations probably had, judging on how the season goes. I think that everybody's kind of optimistic right now with June, the transition, right? On the same page. It's June. But you're right. We can talk about it. and it's interesting. These are probably better conversations for Bills fans to have. I'm just thinking back to some of the other July talking points right ahead of training camps. It's like Turk Schoner. What kind of offense is he going to run?
Didn't he got fired?
Xavier Oman looks good in the exhibition season.
That's right. Brandon, who was it? Brandon Riley, the wide receiver, or somebody like that. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, Turk Schoner got fired 2 weeks before the start of the season.
Yeah,
I think that was
Alex Van Pelt took over, right?
Alex Van Pelt took over. Yeah, things are a little different these days, right?
That being said, we joke, we kid. I've coined it drought brain. We cannot have drought brain infiltrate this podcast, Jay. Just because they didn't make the playoffs for 17 years doesn't mean you use that as justification for being okay with bowing out of the divisional round of the playoffs.
Well, I do have to call you out and tell you that yesterday you just didn't know what day it was for an entire day. And so
yeah, forget drought brain. That's Ella just graduated from pre-K brain.
That's right.
And there was no AC there. We were a little hot, so I wasn't thinking straight brain. It was glorious. So, oh my God. Yeah. They all sang "I Believe I Can Fly." All choreographed, Ella front and center. Me and Gina were a puddle of tears.
Oh boy,
I'm a little behind you on that front, but oh man,
no, that's awesome. That's good. Enjoy it. Enjoy every moment. That's the parental advice, right? That I'm giving to you, which you've I'm sure heard a million times, but you need to hear 1,000,001. Enjoy every moment.
Meanwhile, like Elliot's just like kicking everybody's ass in golf. Like that screenshot that you put on Instagram, Jay, I swore that was like a typo or you were just clowning with everybody. He just obliterated the competition. Can you give your son a little love here and just put that domination into context?
Well, he had a good tournament last week. He's playing that tournament that he played, Western New York PGA, is fun. I usually caddy for him, and at Western New York PGA, there's no caddy, so he's doing it all on his own. He's picking the club, he's shooting it on the rangefinder, he's deciding where he wants to hit it, how he wants to hit it, and so that was a great round. It was a 1 under par round, long distances. He's playing like, you know, if people are golfers, like basically he's playing the red tees at courses now, you know. So, you know, I'm playing, you know, back at the white tees. The only thing I can do is hit it farther than him. That's it. Everything else, if you put the ball down from 100 yards, maybe even a little longer, 150, and we play in, if we go to a par 3, we go to Bobolink out in Orchard Park, he's beating me. There's like, it's happening. You know,
how old is he again?
He's 10. Yeah, he's a baller. He's good. We're going down to we've been loving the U.S. Open this week because it's at Pinehurst. We go to Pinehurst every year for his U.S. Kids Golf World Championship. And he's qualified every year that he's been eligible, starting at 6 years old. He's 10 now. And so this will be our 4th or 5th year in a row of going to Pinehurst. And it's a thrill. It's such a cool thing. There's like 1,700 kids from around the world that come to Pinehurst, and they're all in different age levels. So as 10 years old, he plays in the 10-year-old age division, boys age division, and maybe like 130 kids from literally all over the world, Thailand, Australia, like there's like 25 countries. And I think a couple years ago, there was 25 countries and like 37 states. That's really cool, you know, and to say that like he's one of them, you know, like that's what he's doing, you know. So yeah, he's a good little player for sure.
You are unbelievably modest. That is unbelievable. Holy cow.
Yeah.
Now I have to get Sonny working that Fisher-Price golf set in the basement. We've been doing too many Zach Bryan dance parties and, you know, NFL films running around, just Thunderdoming it. It's time to get him out in the yard with the clubs. And, you know, he's going to be 3 in July. So, you know, probably not too soon, right? That's when you got Elliot out there, I'm guessing.
Elliot was swinging real clubs. The first time that we went, I have a video of it, was a month before he turned 3. He was still in diapers. It was in February. His birthday's in March, so this was in February. We were at the Golf Dome on Worley. He went through a phase for about 6 months where all he wanted to wear was swim outfits. So like swimmy shorts and swim shirts, and he has rain boots on. And we're at the Dome, and he is just striping it right down the middle every time. He's still 2 years old. And I was like, all right, well, I think he might be pretty good at this. And yeah, he started playing in tournaments when he was 5 years old and hasn't looked back. But he also he's a real good baseball player. We were at a ball game tonight and loves basketball. He's a big basketball player too. And so big believer in the 3 sports. Don't want to burn him out on anything. And if I know Sonny, I think Sonny's football. I mean, it sounds like he's got a little bit of brood in him. It sounds like, so, you know.
He is a bruiser. Yeah, he is. He's all over the place. So we're thinking full pads. The second we can go full pads.
Exactly.
Well, I got to play him Tom Brady's speech at that Patriots event on the good of football. I'm all in, man. I'm all in, even with all the concerns. If he wants to do it, he can do it. So, Jay, this was awesome. Thank you so much for spending Friday night here talking Bills, talking football. We'll get to the AFC East on a future pod. I know we talked about that, but plenty of off-season.
We'll meet up at St. John Fisher at training camp or heck, whenever. We'll do it whenever you want. You know you got my number, so you just call me whenever.
Sounds great, Jay. Thanks so much. And also, we're at on Twitter again. What's your handle? Let people know.
Just my name, at Jay Skurski, JaySkurski.
Everybody follow Jay. Read his stuff at the Buffalo News. I just re-upped my subscription. You should as well. It goes well as a companion subscription with Go Long. So golongtv.com. We've got our conversation with Brandon Bean up right now. And thank you to our good friends at Fatty Beer. Make sure you get on in there. See Nick, see Chris, get some seasonal, some IPAs. They're all over the place. Lancaster is apparently the hot spot, Jay. I was just talking to Chris. Yeah, Lancaster is the happening fatty. I mean, they all are, but if you're in that area, make sure you get on in. Thank you so much, Jay. We'll see you soon.
All right, buddy.